Okay, so we're diving deep today into the ketogenic diet, something we know a lot of you out there are super curious about.
Yeah, it's definitely been getting a lot of attention.
It really has. And, people are trying to figure out, is this something that could work for me? Is it healthy? Is it not? Is it going to help me lose weight? How's it going to affect my workouts? All these sorts of questions.
For sure, and there's a ton of information out there.
Yeah.
Some of it's good, some of it not so much.
Exactly. So we've been digging into the research, trying to make sense of it all, and we've got some really interesting stuff to share. We've been looking at a great article from Physio and then some research from places like the neurologist and nutrients to really get a well-rounded perspective.
Yeah, that's the key, right? Going beyond just the headlines and really seeing what the science actually says.
Absolutely. So let's start with the basics. For anyone who maybe isn't super familiar with it, can you just give us a quick rundown of what the ketogenic diet actually is?
Yeah, so basically it's a way of eating that's super low in carbs, high in fat, and then you have a moderate amount of protein.
Okay, when we say low carb, high fat, what are we actually talking about numbers-wise?
So typically you're looking at about 55 to 60% of your calories coming from fat, 30 to 35% from protein, and then only a tiny little sliver, 5 to 10% from carbs.
Wow, that's a pretty big shift for most people.
It is. It's definitely a big change from the standard American diet where, carbs are often the main event.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when people hear high fat especially, there's this immediate is that really healthy kind of reaction?
Totally understandable. But it's so important to emphasize that we're not talking about just any kind of fat. We'll get into the specifics of that later on.
Absolutely. So we know what it is now, but how did this whole keto thing even start?
Well, it's actually really interesting. It wasn't originally about weight loss at all.
Really?
Yeah, the Physio article touches on this. It was first explored as a potential treatment for epilepsy.
Huh, I never knew that.
Yeah, there was some early research in the neurologists that showed some promising results for people with really tough-to-treat seizures.
So it was like a medical thing before it became a diet trend.
Exactly. And even then, the researchers were super careful to say, hey, this needs way more research before we can call it a definitive treatment.
Okay, so that's the historical context, but now obviously keto has become a huge thing for weight loss and just general health.
Totally. So that's what we're going to try to unpack today. What does the research actually tell us about the potential benefits and risks of keto?
Right. And especially for the athletes out there, because that's always a big question, how's this going to affect my performance?
Exactly. So let's dive in, shall we?
Let's do it. So first up, let's talk about weight loss, because I feel like that's the main reason people are interested in keto.
For sure. And there is some evidence to suggest that it can be effective for that.
Okay, so why is that? What's the mechanism behind it?
So one of the key things is that when you drastically cut carbs, your body basically has to find a new source of fuel.
Right. Usually it's running on glucose from those carbs.
Exactly. But without those carbs, it starts burning fat instead. And it produces these things called ketones, which become the primary energy source.
Okay, so that's the whole ketosis thing you hear about.
Exactly. Your body shifts into this fat-burning mode.
And that's where the weight loss comes in.
Yeah, there's a couple of things happening there. So first off, there's that direct burning of fat for fuel.
Makes sense.
And then there's also this effect on insulin, which is a hormone that helps regulate blood sugar. When you're eating a lot of carbs, your insulin levels are constantly spiking, and that can make it harder for your body to burn fat.
So keto helps kind of stabilize that insulin response.
Yeah, there's research in current nutrition reports that suggests keto can improve insulin sensitivity. So basically, your body becomes more efficient at using insulin.
And that helps with fat burning.
Exactly. And then on top of that, there's the satiety factor.
Meaning you feel fuller for longer.
Exactly, because fat and protein are more satiating than carbs.
So you naturally end up eating less.
Exactly, and there's research by Pauli and his team that highlights that.
Okay, so it's not just about forcing yourself to eat less. You actually just feel less hungry.
Right, and that can make a big difference in terms of long-term weight management.
So is there actual data to support this weight loss claim, or is it mostly anecdotal?
No, there's actually a pretty solid meta-analysis in the British Journal of Nutrition that looked at this.
What did they find?
So they compared people who followed a keto diet for a year to those who were on a low-fat diet, and the keto group actually lost significantly more weight.
Wow. That's pretty convincing.
It is. It suggests that for some people, at least this metabolic approach might be more effective for keeping the weight off long term.
And that weight loss in itself can have all sorts of other positive health effects, right?
Absolutely, and Physio Hub points this out specifically for type 2 diabetes.
Right, because excess weight is a major risk factor for that.
Exactly. So losing weight can really lower your chances of developing the disease.
So keto potentially hits a couple of birds with one stone there.
Exactly. Now, it's not just about weight, though. There's also some emerging research on the impact of keto on gut health.
Oh, yeah, I was reading about that in the Physio Hub article. That was interesting.
Yeah, it's still pretty early stages, but there are some hints that keto could be beneficial for your gut microbiome.
Okay, and just to remind everyone, that's like the trillions of bacteria that live in our digestive system.
Exactly, and those bacteria play a huge role in everything from digestion to immunity to even mental health.
Wow, so messing with those bacteria could have like a domino effect on your whole body.
Exactly, and what's interesting is that the Physio Hub article mentioned that keto might even have an impact on the epigenome.
Okay, now you're gonna have to break that one down for me.
Basically, it's like a set of instructions that controls how your genes are expressed.
Okay, so kind of like an on-off switch for your genes.
Yeah, kind of, and the research is suggesting that keto might actually be able to tweak those switches in a positive way.
So it's not just changing what you eat, it's potentially changing how your body actually functions at a genetic level.
Right, and there's some research by Rue and also an NCBI article that back this up.
Wow, so it's like keto's doing all this stuff behind the scenes that we're only just starting to understand.
Exactly, it's pretty fascinating, and it shows how complex this whole diet thing really is.
It really does. So, okay, we've got weight loss, we've got potential gut health benefits. What else is there?
Well, another big one is heart health.
Okay, now that one seems a little counterintuitive, right? Because we're talking about a high-fat diet.
I know that's what I thought at first too, but it's really all about the type of fat.
Right, because not all fats are created equal.
Exactly, like those saturated and trans fats, those are the ones that can raise your bad cholesterol and increase your risk of heart disease.
Okay, so those are the ones to avoid.
Definitely, but on keto, you're supposed to be focusing on healthy fats, like monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats.
So like olive oil, avocados, nuts, that kind of thing.
Exactly, those are the fats that can actually be good for your heart.
Okay, so does the research actually show that keto can improve heart health? Or is it just a theory?
No, there is some research to back it up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Nutrients Journal had an article about this, and then there was also research by Kaczynski and Jornevaz that looked at the impact of keto on cholesterol levels. And they found that in some people, a well-planned keto diet that's rich in those healthy fats can actually lead to improvements in cholesterol.
So like lower LDL cholesterol, lower triglycerides.
Exactly. Those are all positive changes for heart health.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I definitely wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that kind of goes against conventional wisdom, but the research is starting to show that it might actually be true.
And it just highlights how important it is to like really dig into the details and not just make assumptions based on headlines.
Absolutely, you got to look at the nuance.
Okay, so we've talked about weight loss, gut health, heart health.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
Well, there's also been some really interesting research looking at the potential role of keto in cancer treatment.
Whoa. Okay, that sounds pretty major.
It is, and it's important to be really clear here. This is still very much in the early stages of research.
Okay, so we're not saying keto is a cure for cancer.
Absolutely not,
Right.
but there is some evidence suggesting that it could potentially play a supportive role alongside conventional therapies like chemo and radiation.
So how does that work? Like, what's the mechanism there?
So the basic idea is that cancer cells need glucose to grow and thrive.
Right, because sugar feeds cancer or whatever.
Well, it's a bit more complex than that, but
Right.
essentially, yeah, cancer cells are very energy hungry and they rely heavily on glucose.
Okay.
And so by drastically reducing carbs and lowering blood sugar levels, a keto diet could potentially starve those cancer cells of their main fuel source.
Interesting. So it's like cutting off their supply lines.
Exactly. And then on top of that, the ketones that your body produces on keto might actually have some anti-cancer effects themselves.
Really?
Yeah, there's research in Aging Journal and then some work by Weber and his team that's looking into this.
Okay, so again, this is all very preliminary, but it's pretty exciting stuff.
It's definitely an area to watch, but it's super important to emphasize that more research is needed before we can make any definitive claims.
Absolutely. And people should definitely not be ditching their conventional cancer treatments in favor of keto.
No, this is not a replacement for those therapies. It's potentially something that could be used in conjunction with them.
Okay, so that's a really important distinction to make.
For sure. All right, so we've talked about some of the potential benefits of keto now. Let's get real about the risks.
Yeah, because there's always two sides to every coin.
Exactly. And the Physio Hub article does a good job of laying out some of the potential drawbacks.
So what are some of the things people should be aware of?
Well, one is something called dyslipidemia, which is basically an unhealthy balance of fats in your blood.
Okay, that sounds kind of scary.
It can be. It's important to monitor your blood work if you're on keto to make sure your cholesterol levels are staying within a healthy range.
So that's something to discuss with your doctor.
Definitely. Now, another risk that's often mentioned is diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA.
I've heard of that, but I don't really understand what it is.
So it's basically a serious complication that can happen when your body produces high levels of ketones.
Okay.
And it's primarily a concern for people with type 1 diabetes.
So not really a risk for the general population.
Right. It's very rare in people without diabetes, but it's something that people with type 1 need to be very careful about.
Okay. And there's some research by Bueller and his colleagues that talks about this specifically, right?
Exactly. They highlight the importance of close medical supervision for people with type 1 who are considering keto.
So again, talk to your doctor.
Always a good idea. Now, besides those more serious risks, there are also some common side effects that people often experience when they first start keto.
Yeah, I've heard about the keto flu.
Exactly. It's not actually a flu, but it can feel like one.
So what kind of symptoms are we talking about?
Things like headaches, nausea, fatigue, constipation.
Not fun.
Not fun at all, but it usually passes within a few days or weeks as your body adjusts.
Okay, so it's kind of like a short-term pain for a potential long-term gain.
Exactly. And there are things you can do to minimize those symptoms, like staying hydrated, getting enough electrolytes.
Good tips. And I guess it just reinforces that this isn't a diet to jump into lightly.
Right, it's a pretty big change, so you want to make sure you're prepared and that you're doing it safely.
Okay, so we've covered the potential benefits and the risks now. Let's talk about something that I know a lot of our listeners are particularly interested in: athletic performance.
Yeah, this is a big one, and the research here is kind of all over the place.
I was noticing that in the Physio Hub article, it seems like there's no clear consensus on whether keto is good, bad, or neutral for athletes.
Exactly, and it probably depends on a lot of factors, like the type of athlete, the type of sport, the intensity and duration of the activity.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer.
Definitely not. Now, some studies have shown that keto can lead to reductions in body fat and overall weight without losing muscle mass.
Which sounds like a good thing for athletes, right?
On the surface, yes. But the question is, does that actually translate to improved performance?
Right, because just being leaner doesn't necessarily make you faster or stronger.
Exactly. And there's a study in the Journal of Education, Health, and Sport that looked at this.
Yeah.
And they found that keto didn't really have a significant impact on key performance markers like maximum heart rate time to exhaustion and VO2 max.
And those are all pretty crucial for endurance athletes, right?
Absolutely. So it seems like for endurance sports, at least keto might not be the magic bullet.
Interesting. Now, what about other types of sports like strength training or sprinting?
So there's some research suggesting that keto might be beneficial for short bursts of high-intensity exercise.
So like weightlifting or interval training.
Exactly, because your body becomes more efficient at using fat for fuel.
Okay, but isn't glucose still important for those types of activities?
It is, especially for very short bursts of energy like sprinting.
So would keto actually hinder performance in those cases?
It could potentially. Yeah, there's some research that shows that.
Okay, so again, it's super nuanced.
It really is. And honestly, we need more research to fully understand how keto affects athletic performance across different sports and different individuals.
So the jury's still out.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, the Physio Hub article did have some expert recommendations for athletes considering keto.
Oh yeah, what were those?
So the first one was to really evaluate individual suitability, meaning you got to take into account your specific health history, your sport, your goals, and talk to your doctor before making any drastic changes.
Right, because what works for one athlete might not work for another.
Exactly. And then the second recommendation was to advise on gradual transition and customization.
So don't just go cold turkey on carbs.
No, you want to ease into it Give your body time to adjust, and then you can fine-tune the macros based on your individual needs.
So like maybe you need a slightly higher percentage of carbs if you're doing a lot of high-intensity training?
Exactly. It's all about finding what works best for you.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap of everything we've covered today.
Sure. So we talked about the potential benefits of the ketogenic diet, things like weight loss, gut health, heart health, and even a possible role in cancer treatment.
But we also emphasized that the research on some of these is still pretty preliminary.
Exactly. And then we talked about the risks like dyslipidemia, DKA, and the keto flu.
And of course, the all-important advice to talk to your doctor before starting any new diet, especially one as restrictive as keto.
Couldn't agree more. And then lastly, we delved into the impact of keto on athletic performance.
And it's safe to say that the research there is inconclusive.
Yeah, it seems to vary depending on the individual, the sport, the intensity and duration of the activity.
So more research is needed.
Definitely. But in the meantime, athletes considering keto need to proceed with caution and work closely with a healthcare professional.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of keto.
It really has. There's so much to learn about this diet and its effects on the body.
And it seems like there's new research coming out all the time.
It really does. Which is exciting because it means we're getting a clearer picture of how keto works and who it might benefit.
It's definitely a topic that's going to continue to evolve, and we'll be sure to keep you updated on any major developments.
Absolutely. So stay tuned for more deep dives in the future.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.